Alrighty, well, I make that noon, so we will make a start. So, welcome to the Montana Campus Network for Civic Engagement 2024 Centering Indigenous Knowledge webinar series. Thank you for joining us for the third session of the series. We've got one more next week. So, first of all, my name is Pete Buchanan. I am the Associate Director here at the Montana Campus Network for Civic Engagement. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Hannah Evans, and also our host and moderator for today, Dr. Karla Bird, who is our Tribal Outreach Specialist at our host institution, the University of Montana. So first of all, some acknowledgements. Just going to share my screen. Give me a hot minute. There we go. So, first of all, big thank you to Taryn Larsgun for providing the artwork for our entire series. This one is called Reaffirming Ancient Beliefs 2023. If you're interested in seeing any more of Taryn's work, please go to their website. You can also go to our website as well, and you can get links to other pieces of their artwork as well. And then our sponsors, and a huge thank you, first of all, to Humanities Montana, without whom we wouldn't have been able to put on the series. Big thank you to Reach High Montana, RJS Associates, Clearwater Credit Union, Montana State University, and our host institution, the University of Montana. And finally, a special thank you to Campus Compact for providing today's online platform that brought you here today. Some quick announcements. The Montana Campus Network for Civic Engagement, that's us, is excited to announce that we are opening AmeriCorps host site applications on October 30th. So hosting an AmeriCorps member is a fantastic way to expand your department's capacity, enhance programming, and improve student support. So if you are at all interested, we will throw up the link for hosting to be a host site in the chat shortly. And then just some housekeeping bits and pieces here before we start today. Please keep your microphones muted throughout the session. We're doing a webinar, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem, but just sort of be respectful of today's panelists. We will have a Q&A right at the end, but we will encourage you to use the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of the screen. And Karla will be collecting those and share those direct questions with the panelists towards the end. Our session will be recorded, so this will be uploaded to YouTube later on today, so keep an eye out for that. And if you haven't done already, smash that like button and hit subscribe so you can get all the latest updates from Montana Campus Network for Civic Engagement. And finally, at the very end, we really value your feedback on how we're doing here hosting these webinar series. So there'll be a short survey at the end. I think it's 4 questions. So if you wouldn't mind completing that, we would sure appreciate it. That's everything from us here at the network. So I'm going to hand over to Karla, who will be moderating today's session. Karla.
Hi, thank you, Pete. Also keep in mind, next Thursday is our last series of the webinar, and we'll have Matthew Johnson, who will be talking about restorative practices. And he was the director of an alternative school, Buffalo Heights Academy in Browning, Montana, for many, many decades. So tune in next week for that. I have the honor and privilege to introduce our presenters today. And so our first presenter is Kennedy Skinner, who is a member of the Ani Argro-Vaughan from Fort Belknap Indian Community in northern Montana. She's also a mother and student at Montana State University, Billings, pursuing a bachelor's degree in human services. Raised off of the reservation, Kennedy seeks to strengthen her connection to her culture and one day work and live within the reservation. She humbly expresses gratitude to the Native American Achievement Center, the Honors Department, the Max Baucus Institute, and her family and friends for their pivotal support that she credits for her success. Tysha Oleyte is a member of the Upsalika Crow Nation, a mother of 3, and a student at Montana State University, Billings as well. She has a broad knowledge of the history of her people and is very involved with tribal activities. She also lobbied for a later Billings public school start date each fall so all Crow children could attend Crow Fair in August. Tysha is majoring in psychology with a minor in American Indian Indigenous Studies. Wendy Felese is an assistant professor of American Indian and Indigenous Studies at Montana State University Billings. Her work centers around sovereignty and self-determination with an emphasis on cultural resilience and innovation, traditional ecological knowledge, and regenerative practices. Using an indigenizing methodology, her interests extend to working with Indigenous communities worldwide. This semester, her special topics course takes a global approach by examining Indigenous peoples' time-tested solutions to many of our current social, political, and environmental crises. In June, Dr. Felese spent time in her own ancestral homelands of Ireland to meet and learn about the travelers, the Indigenous people of Ireland, and to investigate an upsurge in political tension arising between different communities of Northern Ireland. She is a mother of 3 and is anxiously awaiting the birth of her first grandchild. So with that being said, I'll hand it over to our presenters.
Hello, everybody. It's really great to be here. I'm Kennedy Skinner, and I would really like to introduce you guys to our topic, Bringing It Home at MSUB, also known as Indigenizing Our Program. And so why are we calling it Bringing It Home at MSUB? There's a couple different reasons for that. We do want to acknowledge that the land that MSU Billings sits on is the ancestral homeland of both the Crow and Cheyenne people, as well as sort of a hub for many other Indigenous nations that are located in Montana and even the surrounding area of North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming. Another reason why we wanted to call it Bringing It Home is has a lot to do with the Native American Achievement Center and their presence on campus. So the director over there, Sunny Day Bird, she's amazing. I sing her praises all the time. And she has really focused on making the Native American Achievement Center a home away from home for our Native students who experience a lot of culture shock coming from their more rural Indigenous communities. And another way that we want to bring it home is by taking that same sense of home away from home and sort of working that out into our Native American Studies program. And the research that we are talking about today talks about analyzing our program and how we can work to make it more matching the other ways of studying Indigenous nations within our immediate Indigenous communities, and then sort of like working that viewpoint out to see how we're meeting those goals in a larger global Indigenous perspective as well.
Yes, that's my cue. Shoda, your cue. Shoda, itchikdelu, bilaga balaja, bigat lisha, hissalajish, balaja Tysha Oleyte. Hello, I'm glad you guys all are all here today. My crow name is Young Woman Who Stands Out, and my name is Tysha Oleyte. I am a member of the Uwudasha, which is the Greasy Mouth clan, and a child of the Ashichida, which is the Big Lodge clan. And just to kind of top off what Kennedy said is like, we're really trying to bring it back to like the homelands, because that's like the whole point of indigeneity is like, that's your base, is your homelands, the lands. And then also like really encompassing that local Indigenous knowledge, especially from like our tribal communities and all of that going in. And yeah, introduce you to Dr. Felese here.
So I'm Dr. Wendy Felese. I'm so proud to be presenting today with my students. I was very lucky and very well supported by my department and administration here at MSUB to be able to take a good deep dive into our program as it is and how we hope to see it. And these two dynamic young women agreed to help me and really, took a lot of initiative right away. And so I'm just so happy that we're at this point now. Our work is continuing. And we will probably go through the first part of the spring and then, really come together in a collaborative way and get our findings together. And then that'll really point our way forward for our program.
And so we'll introduce our research talking about the first phase. And in that phase of the research, we really wanted to just take a look, gather information about, what the Montana tribal colleges were doing in their curriculum to teach their people about themselves and Indigenous issues in first, and then we took a larger sort of view, expanding that out into Montana universities, whether they be Indigenous or non-Indigenous, and seeing how their perspective on Indigenous issues and how they teach those. And then we went even wider and took a look at global Indigenous studies programs and how they analyzed and taught Indigenous studies from those international perspectives as well. And so when we first looked, we focused on the Montana tribal colleges. And what we noticed is that each of the tribal colleges in Montana had different ways of different information, obviously, that they focused on. And I wanted to point out the associate's programs that are offered by those colleges that do focus on Native American studies. So we found 6 of the tribal colleges and universities that had an associate degree in Native American studies, being Ahwahnee Nakota College, Chief Longknife College, Little Bighorn College, Fort Peck Community College, Blackfeet Community College, and Stonechild Community College as well. And of those, there is also Salish Kootenai College, which offers a bachelor's degree in their cultural language. And then Ahwahnee Nakota College as well has a bachelor's in Ahwahnee Nakota ecology, which personally I find really fascinating because that degree focuses on the actual reservation lands itself and the ecology surrounding that area and their homelands. And that degree is a great resource of information for those who want to really take an in-depth look into how to care for the homelands and to see that from an Indigenous perspective of really nailing down, what their homelands need from them as their people and how to steward that as well. And that was one of the themes that we noticed in looking at the tribal colleges and then bringing that perspective outward, was that these Indigenous ways of knowing focused on really rooting their cultures in the place that they are in. And then the language as well is another really strong cultural connector, and being able to teach their language and carry that generation from one, or carry that language knowledge from one generation to the next is a strong protective measure for those Indigenous peoples as well, to be able to keep the tie to their culture and to their land very strong, as well as carried in the language, and the words that they use are very tied to land perspectives as well.
So our next phase after that was to do surveys. So we started out by trying to form like focus groups, but then we ended up realizing like this ain't working out. Everyone's just trying to talk over one another. So then we kind of took a step back and like really start looking like, how are we doing this? And then kind of start looking at more the Indigenous methodologies research protocols. So then we decided to go more one-on-one to create, like really try to create that safe place with our students that were our participants, and really wanting to get like their true thoughts about the program and what they thought. And one of the main thing we got from like all of them, like our Indigenous students and our non-Indigenous students, was cultural competency. That's like the very main thing everyone stressed about wanting to understand.
Yeah.
And anything to add, guys?
Yeah, and so one of the things that this survey with the students also focused on was really just their awareness of the program as well. So right now we only have a minor in Native American Studies, and so when we were asking students on our campus about, you know, what would you like to see from this program? We noticed that a lot of them had really a general lack of awareness of the program and what sorts of things that program would be good for. What, you know, what use would that degree be for students who sought out that degree? And so that was one of the things that we noticed as well, that our students were pointing out to us, is that, you know, if they did know what the minor was and that we offered it, you know, how are those students going to see the value in that knowledge and, you know, choose that as a degree of study for them, which we honestly, I found that particularly surprising, because Billings, Montana is such a hub for Native peoples coming through, and we have a big visible presence of Native peoples in this community. And so being able to show our students coming to this campus or interested in this campus and, you know, coming to Billings to really like prepare them and have that cultural competency to view these peoples with respect, and to also acknowledge that, well, they're definitely here and that we're not going anywhere. And so how do we open up those lines of communication and really respectful interaction? And so being able to, as Tysha said, having that cultural competency of, you know, non-Native students, you know, how do they know what is an appropriate way to engage with the culture? And we do have, I had a student that I interviewed who really like wanted to know more, but they were uncomfortable with their level of knowledge of, you know, am I allowed to know these things? Am I allowed to engage in this culture? Is it inappropriate for me to have this curiosity? And you definitely want to make sure that that is an aspect of our program where students feel that the knowledge that they are getting is freely shared, and that they are a welcome part of engagement with our Native cultures.
We'll let you do phase 3.
Oh, okay. We had a third phase where we were basically meeting and talking with potential employers, people that are in the professional world, and kind of trying to gauge what, you know, their experience is, but also what they would like to see people who graduate with a minor in American Indian Indigenous Studies from MSUB, maybe what they would like to see, you know, as part of their repertoire to allow them to ease into, you know, maybe their first job or, you know, a career move. And so I remember this is back in the summer, you know, I started just looking around at, you know, where I live my life, and started, you know, chatting people up at my gym, for example. You know, and some of the responses, you know, I'm like, you know, we're doing this study, can you sign this consent form and everything? But then I would sit down afterwards with them and really sort of flesh it out. And one of the things that, you know, you have a lot of responses, well, you know, you should have the students know how to approach a business interview and really have a good polished resume and things like that. And at first I was like, yeah, okay. And then I started thinking, that's a great idea, you know, for our program to support those students that are just freshly out of college and want to start a career here in Billings. Let's help them with those very necessary steps that can be a huge door opener. So I was like, thank you to those people that you know, the little light bulb went off in my head. So we're going to try to incorporate some of that in some of our, you know, intro courses and such. But the other thing that I was really pleasantly surprised, I went to the NADC, met a lot of people there at the big conference and met up with people later, is that Native or not, professionals in Billings do have at least a desire to really perfect that competency. And we were pleased that across many different walks of life, people really reflected that. We talked to people, at the women's prison. We talked to restaurant owners. We talked to bankers. We kind of ran the whole gamut. One particular one that stands out is, one of the managers at Lowe's who told me that he really wanted his workforce to reflect the population of Billings, right? And so he went and researched it, close to 7%, Native, and he made it his priority to have that reflected in his employees and his partners there at Lowe's. And I thought that was really great. And the other aspect that's really coming into it, which I love to see too, is we add that, to competency, we add the compatibility, right? So the understanding that there's an amount of humility when you are approaching with different cultural backgrounds, that there's a level of humility that goes a long way in understanding that, hey, we have a lot to learn, and we're here to listen. And I think that we were, again, very pleased to see that in a lot of the professional networks here in Billings.
And just to add to that, a lot of the employers wish more people understood certain things, kind of like how funeral protocols and stuff like that, because attending funerals and stuff like that tends to be very different than it is in the dominant culture. You do have a lot more funerals that you do need to attend, and then just the family obligation that you need to be together. And a lot of these employers also stress that they wanted their future employees to understand that.
Yes, and there is one thing that we noticed when talking with employers and coming from our Indigenous perspective as well, is that there is a big shift between, what employers expect from all employees, regardless of their employees' background, but then also sort of built-in expectations that, we have learned growing up in an Indigenous worldview where there's a big clash between what is considered appropriate conduct for an employee and appropriate conduct within our families, and to be able to have an understanding between what are sort of what are my expectations to be a part of my culture, and to be seen as from the other members of my culture as exhibiting that respect to my culture, and attending funerals, attending feeds, attending ceremony throughout the year, and how important that is, that employers, it would be really nice to not have to constantly fight, regardless of what job an Indigenous person has, that, their employers know that that if I need to give notice of this event that I need to go to, that it's not that I'm putting, my personal relationships higher than my desire to be a good employee, but that it is just expected.
Obligation. So what about that relationship thing? Are you related to?
Oh yeah, and we also want to touch on a point of when you're in, when you're in a job in Billings, opposed to when you're working a job on the tribe or on the reservation or whatever. But there's situations where employers expect you to disclose relationships with family. And sometimes as a Native person, you don't know everyone you're related to. And that was another thing we kind of thought about too. That comes up a lot. I have people come up to me and like, oh, how are you doing? How's your grandma doing? And I'm like, oh, she's good. And then people ask me, who's that? And I'm like, I have no idea. I just know we're related somehow.
Yeah, and so especially in as a human service future professional, being mindful of who you're related to as far as like conflicts of interest on who you need to consider as clients or sort of like set boundaries with, that is very important. And there can be potential misunderstandings with that if, of course, like, how are you supposed to know everybody that you're related to? And, what is the obligations in that relationship? Do those obligations interfere with a working relationship? So it's not necessarily just if you're related to this person, there will be a problem, but the different sort of like rules of relationality and obligations in Native American cultures. And moving into sort of like the takeaways from this research and how we would like to consider the evolution of our American Indian Studies program. One thing that we noticed is that, being the largest, populated city in Billings and not having a major or a master's for American Indian Studies is a huge missed opportunities for not only for our community, but for our Native peoples. And so that would be one of our major goals, is to grow this program out so that we can really incorporate the reciprocity needed for re-inhabiting the space literally of Billings and this campus with Indigenous viewpoints, but also, seeing how that these Indigenous perspectives can benefit our community. And another part of incorporating the global Indigenous component of what we learned in that first phase is going to be sort of like taking those themes that we noticed in those even Indigenous communities all across the world, that they do have that strong tie to land and to language and those sort of like community relationships. And how do we bring that into our program?
But before you move on, I just want to add to the point of like not having a major here is a really big missed opportunity, especially because the closest reservation to Billings is the Crow Reservation. And there's a saying amongst Crows that Crows don't like to be far from home. They don't like to be home. And this is the closest college that they can go to. So I really do think it's like a really big missed opportunity, especially because that reservation is literally right there.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that we wanted to really highlight as one of our major takeaways is that when we're thinking about incorporating Indigenous viewpoints back into this program and bringing it home, is we're not decolonizing our program, we're indigenizing it. And that is an important distinction because, it might sound like indigenizing is just another way of saying decolonizing, but sort of like highlighting indigenizing is a very important way of sort of like reworking the perspective with the words that we use in this program, because Indigenous ways of being and ways of knowing have completely different sort of like vocabulary packets and thought processes that go along with them. And to focus on indigenizing rather than decolonizing, it really supports the truth that we know that Indigenous cultures have continued and that they have survived and that they have been resilient through colonial history. And so we're not sort of like working backwards to pre-colonial times in order to bring our language forward. Our language and our Indigenous ways of being have continued throughout. And so we're growing that indigeneity out and bringing people back into that Indigenous way of knowing.
It's really embracing that innovation. And to add on to that, we're like trying to look at it more from, what is this program going to look like 7 generations from us? Like, we know we're not going to be here forever. We'll eventually graduate and move on, but we want this program to be growing and like for the future generations is what it needs to be.
And so when we talk about sort of like those concrete changes that we would like to bring to the program, language courses is really super necessary. We do not have language classes for any of our our Montana-based tribes here at MSU Billings. And that is something that the Native American Achievement Center and Sunny Day Robert has been focusing on and putting a lot of time and investing a lot of effort into. And one of the huge successes that she has seen from her work is being able to incorporate an elder in residence program for this year. And that is such a novel program that we're able to incorporate here because of Sunny's work. And our Native students have had a lot of engagement with the elders that we have brought to campus, and being able to have those elders here to share their knowledge, and also just to really encourage those youth. The elders can really see a lot of themselves and can provide a lot of encouragement, especially when we have students who, are experiencing homesickness from having to be, even Crow students who are not very far away. You think about traveling in Montana, you're 2 hours from everywhere, but that's a huge separation for some of our students. And to have those elders come in as another piece of home from, regardless of where those students are from, having that elder here to really ground them in their studies and encourage them is super important.
So, and part of that too is, so we've had Dr. Little Bear and Buster Moore come back in September, each different weeks. And just with all their busy schedules that they have while they're here, we're still able to get them to come to some of our classes, and that was really cool. Let's see.
Another thing that we're really trying to incorporate, and Kennedy was talking about it, but kind of indigenizing our program, and that includes applying indigenous methodologies, and that goes along with obviously language and culture and things like that. But we'd really like to start from that place where we're kind of decentering kind of hegemonic authority in a classroom. For me, and I think for most of my students, it's going to be multivocal, right? There are going to be different perspectives, lots of ways of thinking about things, lots of ways of talking about things. And that's one of the first things that we do in our classes. We take a note of where we're standing, whose land was this, are these people represented, are their voices being heard? That's one of the most important things. And then also, in certain topics, there may be people that have differing viewpoints. I'm thinking of one particular case. This was last semester. We were talking about, museums and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, and Tysha's laughing because she was in that class, and there were some varying opinions. And I would tell my students, that's great. This is what education is all about: is listening to each other, dialoguing with each other. And so, Randy Bear Don't Walk from our Native American Achievement Center reminded me that that's what classrooms really are about, is having the different voices. Bottom line is that we have an undercurrent of respect for each other in that academic engagement. So that's something else that we're really focused on, is indigenizing our classrooms as well. And I also wanted to talk really quickly about, we're really interested in our program in working in a very interdisciplinary way with other departments. We were talking yesterday about environmental studies, is so much of a sibling to what we're doing. And so we'd like to maybe co-teach or find a way that we can work more closely with our colleagues in that department or in that program. And also, in our psychology department, we have a professor here who's going to be introducing a course on indigenous, like the psychology of indigeneity, which is really important, and we can also obviously incorporate that into our courses as well. And last, I wanted to add, we were talking about, Dartmouth. When we did our institutional survey, we found some really cool stuff happening in the nation, obviously globally. Dartmouth has a really cool class. It's called Pen and Ink Witchcraft, which is a way of talking about an Indigenous take on treaties and the history of abrogated, nullified, not honored treaties. And we would like to incorporate that as well, a class where you really get the chance to read these treaties. What do they say? What are the promises that are embedded in those treaties? What do those treaties look like now? And so there's some stuff going on here in Montana and Wyoming that really sort of tests the history of treaties and where they stand today in terms of state law, right, federal law, things like that.
Just to add on to that, the interdisciplinary way, like every single major here is affected by American Indian and Indigenous Studies. Like every single major could take away something from that minor.
And Tysha and I have both noticed that in the other classes that we've taken outside of this program. We've spoken before about in just about every class that we take, if we have the ability to focus on Indigenous viewpoints or Indigenous events in our assignments, that that's something that we're able to do, and it really makes that coursework more engaging and more important for us, so that we can share those perspectives with our peers and then with our professors as well.
That's really cool. It's like really eye-opening to see how much people don't understand, and I'm always amazed by that, because I'm like, the reservation is literally like just down the road. How do you guys not know?
And so being able to work closely with those tribal colleges that are so close to us is something that is going to be very, really super necessary, very, very vital to building out this program, because, as I stated earlier with our tribal colleges and how the associate's degrees that they have, they do tend to focus on, those cultures that are on those homelands. And so it would be very important for us to work closely with those tribal colleges to bring those specific perspectives into our curriculum. And I would actually really like Tysha to talk about a little bit about, she has some really great insight on how to bring Crow culture into the curriculum.
Sorry, experiential learning. Sorry, Crow there.
Oh,
yes.
So one of our ideas that we're kind of playing around with now is maybe thinking about taking a group of the American Indian and Indigenous Studies students down to like experience Crow Fair at camping level, because visiting Crow Fair and camping at Crow Fair are two completely different experiences. And I always hear people that are like, oh, I think Crow Fair is so cool. And I'm like, no, you got to camp. You got to get the full experience of having the camp crier in the morning and the 49 singers all night. And so we're kind of playing with that idea of like wanting to take a group of students to really experience the culture. And that'll be like our first thing, and hoping to expand this more to like include all the different tribal nations in Montana, because every single tribal nation has their own celebration that is their culture. And it's like the best way to understand a culture is to be with that culture, in my opinion. I guess I do want to add too that I think a key point of like really getting this program up and running is having a professor who understands cultural competency and cultural humility, because we're talking about all this and like fostering that safe space to like be able to express your opinions. That's kind of why I'm here today, is because Wendy made us feel like that with the first class I had with her. And I was just like, wow, there's really a way to like be able to discuss this out in the open. And yeah, there's disagreements, but that is like the best way for us to be able to understand each other. I'm thankful for you, Wendy.
Thank you. Well, I'm thankful for my students, all of them, these two, as I said, these dynamic women. The last thing that I really wanted to say is, first of all, we're so grateful, honestly, for the writers, the people who came together and wrote Essential Understandings regarding Montana Indians, because every class, our program is rooted in their definition of worldview. And so that's one of the things that we really really interrogate in our classes. And what does it look like when worldviews are in conflict? So I lean heavily on those documents that they put together, and we'd like to grow the worldview out. You know, that way of being that transcends the experience of a single lifetime, and really that community-centric idea that is worldview, and grow that out. And so with that, you know, as Kennedy and Tysha both mentioned, I'd like to work very closely with our tribal colleges. My colleagues there, the students that we hope will choose MSUB at some point, because they are home. Those tribal colleges are home. That's why, you know, bringing it home is that collaboration. And so that's really, I think, kind of our vision, what we've found out so far, and what we will continue to be looking at with interest, and, you know, with a lot of pride in where we are now. Thank you.
So maybe we can take some questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the Q&A. We have one question from Gabriella. She said, "Thank you for sharing all this important information with us. As we discuss cultural competency and appropriate conduct, I'm wondering if UM hosts any trainings, educating sessions for staff, involving a mixture of teaching Indigenous knowledge, ways of knowing, as well as respectful interaction with Native people." So I can answer that in regards to U of M, but I think we also, maybe that'll be a question that you guys could follow up to, with how you support, or how does an institution support our staff and faculty. But I wrote down a few things that are coming up, a few events. Actually, tomorrow here at U of M, we have an Indigenous mentoring training. And so if you're a person that is working with Indigenous students, Indigenous populations, or want to, it's a really great training at 1:00 p.m. And it's a two-part training series. So the first part was last Friday. This will be the second part. So it's 1 p.m. at the Lawmason Center tomorrow. We also have a health equity conference going on this afternoon in the UC. So if you're on campus, there's a lot of the focus is on Indigenous health and Indigenous research methods. We have an Indigenous Ways of Knowing STEM course. And actually, we'll have it again in the fall. But we actually visited Blackfeet and Fort Belknap territory, and we took some of our college students out to some buffalo jumps, Blacktail Cave, Mission Canyon. We also checked out Fort Belknap's 2 buffalo herds, and one of their herds has over 1,600 buffalo. So really significant. So our students loved it. So that's a course that will be offered again in the fall. I also wrote down there's a conference in Browning, October 21st and 22nd, which is this coming Monday and Tuesday, and it's called the Gifts of the Pishkan, which is our Buffalo Drive, our Buffalo Jump. So a 2-day conference on that. And then let's see. Oh, I didn't write this date, but Dr. Brad Hall, who's the president of BCC, will be at Missoula College. Him and I will be facilitating a training on tribal relations. I also encourage everyone to follow All Nations, UM All Nations. They have an upcoming Indigenous fashion show on November 1st at the Wilma Theater, and I believe tickets are like $15. We also have on November 1st, the same day, we also have our college stick game where our students, last year, U of M played MSU stick game, and I believe this is open up to a lot of different colleges. So that'll be November 1st. It's a good way to get involved and to learn about Indigenous games. On November 14th, we're also having Fort Belknap, the TIPO office, come to U of M to do a panel on the repatriation of the children that they repatriated, children or ancestors that they repatriated from Carlisle. And so that's being planned for November 14th. November 5th is Eloise Cabal Day. So on campus, we facilitate an all-day event dedicated to Eloise Cabal. And so right now we're looking at having a panel that will review some of the legalities of the court case. And then we'll have some guest speakers as well. Also remember, November is Native American Heritage Month. So if you're working at an institution across Montana, it's really important that we have events, our awareness, our activities about our tribal communities, our tribal nations in November. And then we also opened up a Native American Center at the law school. So that's for our students that just recently opened up. And then we're also potentially pursuing an Indigenous Serving Institute status with Carnegie. So that might be something for MSU Billings to also consider. And that was about, that's how you indigenize your the status is based on how an institution indigenizes their processes, policies, and procedures and curriculum in order to serve and better support Indigenous people. So with that being said, I'll hand that question over to our presenters of just maybe upcoming trainings, events, or activities that may be going on.
Yeah, so that that training and sort of like competency building process is something as well that this elder in residence program is really focused on, and that's something that Sunny has made very great and successful efforts on inviting faculty to the presentations that our elders in residence are doing on campus. And another part of the events that are centered around the Elder in Residence program are talking circles. And those talking circles have been very well attended, both by non-Native students, but by faculty as well. And so that competency building is something that I believe at this point is not like required as training for faculty here at MSUB, but that is definitely something that Sunny is aware of, and invites faculty to these presentations to help build that awareness and that competency. And I'm so excited to hear about all these events coming up in November, and part of the All Nations Club here on at MSUB is definitely trying to build more events that just sort of like really make sure that that awareness is out and about. We had some really cool events that happened here in Billings for Indigenous Peoples Day, and keep an eye out for me when I go to that stick game tournament.
Also, I'd like to say our College of Education is really doing a great job with IFA. I know that for sure. I've had a couple of trips different places with them, and I know that they're working really hard to incorporate that college-wide. So they're doing a lot of outreach and work in that regard as well here.
Also, we have another question, but also Superman will be in Missoula, and so he's a crow artist, dancer. He has many talents, but that'll be 7 p.m. at Sentinel High School. And then we also have another question here from Cheryl. Thank you for the list of events. Is there a need for specific training and cultural competence for educators at all levels? Do any of the higher ed provide that? One of the things that we do at U of M is we have every employee needs to take our Indian Education for All online training before they start here at U of M, and so that's a required online training. But I would say that's definitely a great point that perhaps we can set up consistent in-person trainings for ongoing professional development. Let's see. Oh, okay. So we have another question. Thank you for sharing about your process. I would love to learn more about what you learned in your conversations with employers. Did they highlight any particular advantages of a Native American Studies minor, major, or skills they hope students will learn? Did you interview any tribal employers? And if so, what perspectives did they offer?
That's good. I did interview here at our Native American Achievement Center, obviously professionals Sunny and Randy. In terms of the first part of the question, as I said, I was really, pleasantly surprised that there was so much receptive agreement that there has to be, that our graduates not only do they need to be prepared to go into the workforce, but that employers also have an obligation here in Billings, especially with the multicultural environment that we have here. They also have an obligation to reach across those cultural differences and understand a little bit better how to make those situations work. So I'm trying to think, it's been a while, I don't have my notes in front of me, which tribal professionals I did speak with. Give me a second here. I might have to review my notes on that, but that's a great question. And we will be doing more of that as we take this into the rest of the semester and into the spring.
Okay, so if anyone has any more questions, we still have about 10 minutes for any questions that are out there from the audience.
And I would like to point out the conference that Wendy was talking about. That was in the summertime. That was NADC's annual Big Sky Native Econ Conference. And so there was actually a really great presence that attended there. I was doing an internship with them over the summer. And so it was really great to work with NADC and to see all of the different ways that Native American Development Corporation is really building out that economic development in Billings. And they've got some really great collaborations that they started this summer. And so being able to have that conference that Wendy attended to talk with the other attendees really sort of gave her a great perspective on what sorts of like expectations that these employers have when working with Native American cultures, especially if they're led by Native Americans themselves, that there is sort of that expectation that you're going to come into that relationship with that business from a very respectful and humble viewpoint.
You got us connected with Noel.
Oh yeah, and we will be hopefully meeting up with Noel Two Liggins within the next couple weeks or so. And we are still trying to get a hold of Western Native Voice, but obviously it's election season and they are very busy.
Yes, yeah. That is one another result that we found out when working with Native professionals is, there's definitely different styles of interaction that are more successful and seen as, I believe, from my perspective, seen as more respectful when it comes to engaging with those professionals. Over the phone and over Zoom that's just not as attractive when we're going to actually meet with these professionals and trying to get one-on-one appointments in their busy schedules, because they are busy professionals, is something that yields much better results and a much better relation. Better connection, communication when we want to work with those professionals. And we found that with the students as well.
I have a question. So what are some potential practices that faculty can implement to better support Native students at our non-Native colleges and universities?
Personally, I think that in classroom settings where Native representation and Native ways of knowing are not the focus, there can be an element of discomfort for Native students, and it can be very difficult for them to speak up when they don't feel represented in the classroom and they don't have, other peers in the class that can, sort of help reinforce their physical presence and existence. And so for professors to be very mindful of those students, not necessarily like honing in on them in the classroom, because that can be very intimidating as well, but taking time either before or after class to make sure that those students feel heard and acknowledged. And if they're not comfortable sharing their viewpoints in class, I think that that can be very useful and very valuable for a professor to sort of like make connection with that student and make sure that that line of communication is open so that that student feels heard.
And I'd like to add on to that too, just from my own experience, just the professor being like open. Because we talked about earlier, like we like to turn in a lot of our if I get the freedom over one of my assignments, I am gonna make it an Indigenous assignment. And like I obviously know more about my culture than a lot of these professors, and just being open and not pushing me back on like what I know about my own culture, that has been like really nice. I do have had like a lot of good experience with a lot of professors being like, oh, and like wanting to be more educated on it rather than like shutting down what my idea is. So I think just the being open to what it is.
Great. And I have a question for Wendy. Where do you see like the future of the Indigenous or NAS program at MSU Billings going towards? Or where do you see the landscape of our Indigenous programming? What are the upcoming things that you see in the future for the field?
They're ambitious. For like just looking forward, I think we mentioned that in what our major takeaways were. We're thinking generations, like literally 7 generations. I would like to see it way more infused. I would like to see kind of this connection with MSUB and our tribal colleges much stronger. Literally, an avenue between both that have the dialogue much more regular, much more, systematically regular, right? I'd like to talk to my colleagues at the tribal colleges much more. I'd like to make room for more Native voices in this program. As I think it was Tysha mentioned, or maybe Kennedy right away, last summer when we first started it and we started to talk to students, a lot of students did not realize that they could choose the AIIS minor. It was not very well noticed, or it was kind of hiding somehow. So I'd also like to see it much more robust. Even, as a minor, as Kennedy mentioned, it complements, you think about any major, basically, if you choose American Indian Indigenous Studies as your minor, it's going to enhance what you're studying as your major, not just because you're in Billings, but just the world that we're living in now. That's where everything is headed, indigenizing knowledge, especially Indigenous local knowledge is in place. So, bringing that Crow expertise, where are we? What are the stories? What does this landscape mean generations, centuries back? And how can we incorporate that into the program? So yeah, I'd like to see many more voices, but obviously, as I said, decentering kind of that hegemonic authority and making it open to more and more Indigenous and Native voices. And also, lastly, to incorporate that global perspective as well, because I personally am convinced that until we realize that traditional Indigenous knowledges do provide an answer, they do have solutions for what's plaguing us now in terms of just the environmental degradation that we see around us and climate change and things like that. I want the program to reflect that long after I'm gone, to understand that very important principle.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. Pete, do you have any closing comments?
Thanks, Karla. First, well, thank you very much to all of our panelists. That was a really insightful conversation. Really appreciate your time today. And a huge thank you to all of our attendees as well. Thank you very much for being with us today. For more information about the Centering Indigenous Knowledge webinar series, you can go to the Montana Campus the Montana Campus Network for Civic Engagement website at mtengage.org. And if you'd like to share today's session with anybody, it will be available on our YouTube channel later today. as I mentioned before, we do really appreciate your feedback. So if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes just to fill out our very short questionnaire at the end of today's session, that would be wonderful. And then just a final plug for next week's session, which is with Matthew Johnson from Buffalo Hyde Academy on October 24th at the same time. So with that, thank you so much. Goodbye, and we'll see you next time.